We do appear to have a quorum, but again, I'll just give maybe 2 more minutes to allow additional members of the committee to file in, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
That's more Americans who die in 1 year in this pandemic. And in World War I, World War II.
And if folks could please stay on mute, obviously when not speaking, that'd be great. Thank you.
I'm here, but I can't seem to get my video to show up. That's why you're all spared, because.
Okay, George, no worries, thanks. Okay, we do have a quorum, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome members of the committee and our 4 attendees. You are at the March cycle of the Transportation and Environment Committee for Manhattan Community Board 5. I'm the chair of the committee, EJ Kalifarsky. Our vice chair is Sam Levy. We have a couple of housekeeping items at the top tonight, but I suspect that this is actually going to end up being a pretty brief meeting. First off, a housekeeping item. Next Wednesday, March 3rd, which is when the Land Use Committee of CB5 is meeting as usual. Our committee, T&E, will join that land use meeting for a joint meeting. The Empire State Development Corporation will be presenting the draft environmental impact statement for the Empire Station Complex redevelopment, which is planned for the entire neighborhood around Penn Station. This redevelopment is, of course, a huge land use action, as well as having major transit implications, hence the joint meeting between our 2 committees to hear the draft environmental impact statement, or the DEIS. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount happening in regards to this proposal. A lot of moving pieces, and this DEIS is one of them. We are also supposed to get a separate presentation of the master plan for the site at some point. And so in general, we're just going to try to stay as informed as possible as these all continue moving forward. So again, members of the committee, we will join the land use, the LUHZ committee, next Wednesday, March 3rd, for at least the beginning of their meeting, so that we can have a joint meeting and hear that draft environmental impact statement together. So please put that on your calendars for a week from Wednesday. Next up, we had a bus stop application on our agenda today as the first item on the agenda for tonight. James and Sarah did diligence on this application and visited the site multiple times, including Friday, Saturday, and today. So thank you for diligently looking into this, but on no occasion did they see any of the required posting that the applicant was supposed to do to let the community know that we would be hearing the application tonight. So since there's no evidence that the community was aware we would be hearing it tonight, we can't hear it tonight. The applicant was informed. The board office let the applicant know that we wouldn't be able to hear the application because the community was not informed, and we invited them to try again next month. Presumably they will. Our next T&E meeting will still be within the 45-day window that DOT has presented for comments. I'm not sure if we have a DOT rep in attendance tonight. I don't see Colleen. Anyway, so that will probably happen next month. So finally, the last item on the agenda tonight is an update from members of the T&E committee. This is not an application or a presentation from the city or the community, but rather an update from members of the committee. We don't plan on taking any kind of action on this tonight or position. It's an update on some ongoing research that has been done by members of the committee. So I suspect we'll just be staying in business session, that we won't need to hear from members of the public tonight. Not that there are many in attendance anyway. So just to give it some framing, something that we talk about very frequently when evaluating all manners of applications that come before us and proposals from DOT to reconfigure streets or install bike lanes. Something that we, as you'll all know, something that we talk about incredibly frequently is whether or not enforcement is being adequately done to enforce kind of the use of this, the appropriate use of the street, the projected volume and the safety of bicyclists, cars, pedestrians, etc. We talk about it so frequently that we it's almost kind of become a regular postscript that we add to as a condition to almost every position that we end up taking on street reconfiguration or sidewalk widening or bike lane installation. With that in mind, and in the hope of getting away from just kind of nibbling around the edges and sticking it as a postscript on every resolution, we asked members of the committee to form kind of a small internal task force and start to take a look more comprehensively at this question of how are enforcement resources being allocated, and what, if anything, can we adopt as a more comprehensive enforcement policy or enforcement recommendation. Once again, instead of just begging NYPD to do better enforcement at the end of every resolution. So this is ongoing research that several members of the committee have been doing for several months. They'll continue doing research. So tonight we wanted to give them the opportunity to sort of provide an interim update about what they've learned so far, what they intend to continue researching and learning, and if appropriate, to give other members of the committee maybe the opportunity to provide some strategic suggestions about how maybe we could continue to track down some of these answers. So again, this will probably stay in business session, and if there are any suggestions from other members of the committee, we'll kind of provide that opportunity to say that. But they've been, again, researching comprehensively these questions of, are there better ways to provide, to do enforcement? Are there, particularly in the context of some of the discussion that was happening very actively last summer, are there options in terms of changing the jurisdiction of who conducts certain types of traffic enforcement? And in particular, one reason why we thought it would be useful for this to come up, to get an update from these members of the committee this month, is because there is a bill that is apparently potentially going to be voted on by the city council very soon. It's a bill that would reassign the jurisdiction to investigate vehicle crashes from NYPD to DOT. This is a somewhat smaller change than some other proposals that we've maybe discussed or that have been presented to the public in the past, like specifically at one time in the past, all traffic enforcement was done by DOT as opposed to NYPD. But the fact that this bill was coming before the city council this month made it seem like a good opportunity to get an update from the members of the committee who have been doing this research. Again, the goal here is to come up with some kind of comprehensive policy or vision that CB5 can ultimately adopt as a position. So it didn't, in that, because we were trying to get away from, again, weighing in small minor ways and come up with some kind of policy that we could adopt comprehensively, it didn't necessarily seem to make sense to weigh in on that one individual city council bill. But again, it seemed like a good opportunity to update the committee with our task force's ongoing work and their continuing work to work towards some kind of comprehensive position or recommendation that we might be able to adopt down the road, perhaps a few months down the road. So Noah, BJ, John, and Joel have been doing research on this for a couple of months. They'll continue to. But we wanted to give them the opportunity tonight to talk about their successes in their research so far, and maybe their not so successes, and what they kind of what their approach has been, and what we still want to learn as we continue to have this discussion. So I think with that, I'll send it over to Joel to start the conversation, to talk briefly about what the task force has looked into so far and what they've learned.
Of course you can. You shouldn't even be trying. So why not? Because you.
Thanks, EJ. So you gave a lot of the, this will be shorter than we thought, because you gave a lot of the background that I was going to talk about.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, that was good. That was good, because so I don't have to repeat it. The one part of the background that you didn't really mention was, we as a board had our own concerns each time we passed a bike lane, a street widening resolution. But we also had, particularly a couple of years ago, a lot of input from community members who showed up each time a bike lane was being proposed to voice concerns. And the concerns had to do with just pedestrian concerns, that had to do with the taking up of space by bike lanes that made it sometimes harder for people to maneuver across the street, particularly from senior citizens, and also the issues that we'll talk about rogue cycling and enforcement or lack of enforcement. In the course of, we looked back at the beginning of this process for the past 4 or 5 years of T&E resolutions. And in each resolution that had anything to do with bike lanes or street use, we asked DOT to get back to us. We passed every one of their requests, and we would ask them to get back to us with, at the beginning, we would just say, please follow up in 3 or 6 months and tell us how this is working. Later, we got more specific, and we said, not just tell us how it's working, but please give us data. Please check with other agencies. Please give us, and we had lists of specifics. Needless to say, we're here because they never got back to us literally on any of those requests. We came up with a list of questions to ask them, and I think rather than doing that, which we talked about last summer, we're here today, and our task was to talk about or to try to come up with different methods of enforcement. So we reached out to our 3 city council members, Powers, the speaker, and Rivera. We didn't get much feedback from Johnson or Rivera. I did get some fairly extensive feedback from Councilmember Powers, and I'll get into that in a second. We also tried to get some data to inform this discussion, and I actually just this afternoon got a little bit of data from Franklin Richards at Councilmember Powers' office. It wasn't actually giving me data, but he sent me to a website called Crash Reports, which aggregates crash vehicle crash statistics on a website for New York City, and you could do it by council district or by community board district. It's very hard to interpret because it's really just dots on a map. But other than that, we haven't gotten haven't gotten any significant data. And we haven't really even been told where we can get that data. So in terms of ideas that Councilmember Powers suggested, he was not opposed, he said, to continuing to have cycling enforced by NYPD, although I think the general feeling in this committee is to move away from that, or to talk about moving it to DOT. And as part of that, I guess this would work whether it's DOT or NYPD, to have a pilot enforcement program. He suggested pick an area that's particularly egregious. He suggested the West 50s because that's where a lot of the complaints have been coming from, and do a strong targeted enforcement and see how that pans out, try different methods of enforcement and see what works. That was suggestion number one. His next suggestion was education. We've tried in our resolutions to ask DOT to come up with something more than what they call street ambassadors, which didn't seem to have much of an effect. He suggested that reaching out to members of the biking community, including groups like Transportation Alternatives, Bike NYC, and other groups, to see if we could possibly work with them rather than, as it seems today, we seem to be working against them, or they seem to be they seem to feel that we're working against them, that by promoting cycling safety, we are opposing expansion of cycling. So that was a second idea. We did talk about delivery bikes being a significant problem of enforcement and safety. That many of the complaints come from people who are concerned about delivery bikes riding on sidewalks, riding the wrong way, riding way too fast. But Keith expressed the same concern that other members of the council have been expressing about any enforcement against delivery bike drivers is going to have an effect on their livelihood. So we have two things that are beating at each other there, and that's something we're going to have to deal with and tackle. We talked briefly about the growth of electric bikes and scooters and other motorized users of the streetscape. And we didn't really come up with any solution on that. E-bikes were legalized the previous summer. E-scooters were legalized the previous summer. There's still a lot of users on the street using illegal vehicles, motorized skateboards, motorized Segway type wheelies, all of which are illegal but continue to be used, and there seems to be no enforcement against any of them. Another methodology for tackling this issue for enforcement was, Keith and I talked about, was technology. DOT has technology to stop or mitigate speeding by cars by putting up speeding cameras. There could be similar technology out there that we're not aware of, or neither of us were aware of, that could deal with bike issues. One of the problems of that is that bikes are not individually identifiable. We talked about the fact that city bikes have code numbers on them, but they're really hard to see from a distance. A camera's not going to pick them up. And individual bikes don't have identification. And, especially, a biker is wearing a helmet and possibly wearing a mask. You can't tell who they are, and you can't enforce things against them using technology, but it's something that may be out there in the future. Speaking of City Bike, we talked about working with City Bike and possibly talking to them about what ideas they might have for enforcement. Their technology seems to be a little more advanced than that of the city, and and we didn't know if they have the ability to, track when someone is using their bike and riding the wrong way on a one-way street or something like that. It's something to explore with them. We talked about bike registration. There seems to be a lot of, within the biking community, opposition to that. That would not only make bikes identifiable, individually identifiable, it has, to my mind, other benefits, which is, if every bike is identifiable, you can, if your bike gets stolen, you have a way to try to track it down. That's not an enforcement or safety issue, it's just a benefit to it. One side possibility Keith talked about was working within the parameters of Vision Zero, because this is a safety issue, it's a pedestrian safety issue, and Vision Zero apparently has funding, he believed, either through the Borough President's Office or the Public Advocate's Office for safety initiatives. I don't believe in our group anyone has pursued that, but it's something that's out there that we could do in the future. We had asked the council members for statistics on the types of complaints that they've received over the past few years, but we haven't been able to get any response on all of that. I think in terms of ideas to date, that was what we talked about. So EJ mentioned at the beginning the idea of moving, global shift of traffic enforcement from NYPD to DOT. Possible also is to create a separate bike enforcement unit within either DOT or NYPD, or just move bike enforcement to DOT. I'm not sure how any of those things would work. We haven't really talked about them in detail, but if there is a shift to DOT, we think this is something we could raise and try to, start at the outset of that shift to make sure it gets in there. In addition to the crash enforcement city council bill that EJ mentioned, there are a couple of bills before the city council right now that have to do with biking safety issues. The main one, which I think Noah, you're going to speak to, am I right?
Yes.
Is about
Yes.
Okay, I'll let you talk about that one, the private citizen enforcement.
Private citizen. Okay. Thank you very much, Joel. We appreciate it. So the bill that I'm going to be speaking about was introduced on the 19th of November of last year, of 2020, by Stephen Levin of Brooklyn. And Councilmember Levin, there was a hearing on the 12th of January in the Committee on Transportation. And the bill reads that no person shall park, stop, or stand a vehicle within a radial distance of 1,320 feet of a school building entrance or exit in a manner that obstructs a bicycle lane, bus lane, when bus lane restrictions are in effect, sidewalks, crosswalks, or a fire hydrant. And basically what this bill does, it requires the DOT to make a civilian sort of website where people can go to that place and submit photos and words, trying to see what they saw while some vehicle was blocking a bike lane, a bus lane, a sidewalk, or a crosswalk or a fire hydrant. And then a DOT is going to bring some sort of law trial. It was very confusing, to the office of to the OATH, which stands for the Office of Trials and Hearings. And if that case is, I guess, won, the civilian complainant would receive 25% of any proceeds from that hearing. which I believe the fine was $175. This bill is supported by Speaker Johnson, along with Councilwoman Carlina Rivera, and the DOT and the mayor's office are against this bill. Thank you.
So there's a bunch of other bike legislation that's out there, or bike related legislation, one of which is Councilmember Rivera introduced a bill about a bike infrastructure map. I'm not sure that really relates to the enforcement and safety issues that we were talking about. BJ, is there anything you wanted to say about that one?
Nope. I mean, thank you, Joel and Noah. I think she presented that, and I was just checking the action, and it was introduced to the city council, but there hasn't been any updates or any vote on it. And then just to add, when I spoke with Jeremy Unger from Carlina Rivera's office back in November, and then last Friday to someone who's representing him, they didn't have any data, which is something that we were trying to collect, as Joel mentioned, but their concerns were about citizens, saying parking laws because of the, city bikes and the bikes that's going around. And then the business access from the loading zones is an issue because, again, the bikes, those city bikes are taking up the space. And then two things that came out, which was probably something we're looking into, is that the concern from individuals with disabilities, right? Because they may be hard of hearing and they can't hear when a bike is coming or they're ringing those bells, right? Because they're hard of hearing or deaf and mute. And the other one was for senior citizens. It's not easy for them to naturally see some of these bike signs or the bike zones. So other than that, I mean, that was back in November, December, and I have not had any updates, but those are some of the back information that we got just to share with the group.
Thanks, BJ. John, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add or any other my fellow task force members want to add.
Yeah, I mean, just unfortunately, we haven't heard anything from the DOT from our main inquiries that we had from them. So still kind of radio silence from them.
So thanks. So I guess at this point, really what we were hoping for was a little brainstorming. I mean, I'll turn it back to EJ, but of ideas that either expanding on ideas that we have, what you think of ideas that we have, or things that we haven't thought of yet. And I hope there are some of those out there.
Yeah, thanks, Joel, and thanks everybody. So yeah, at this point, I think we'd love to hear any kind of feedback or particularly strategic suggestions, if you might have them, of things that that we haven't thought of yet, ideas or people to reach out to. Nancy, you've had your hand up.
Yeah. I've never seen one of these ambassadors. Has anyone ever seen one? I mean, you mentioned them, Joel, and they talk about them, but I've never seen one. I was curious if anyone else has ever experienced. Are they called bike ambassadors? What kind of ambassador?
I think they called them, I think DOT referred to them as street ambassadors. Or
street ambassadors. I've never seen
like
one. Has anyone else? That's my question.
Sounds like no.
Oh, so then can we ask DOT for some information on how many there are, where they are located, what hours of the day they operate, and have they filed any reports back on their findings? I think that would be, they keep throwing that at us, but we don't know anything about it. No one's ever seen them. And so let's get some statistics back on the operation and performance of these ambassadors.
It looks like Colleen has joined us now. So Colleen, if you do have any information for us, feel free to chime in. Otherwise, I think we're just kind of
Hey, it's Colleen from DOT. Sorry, I just joined in the meeting. What are you looking for?
I think the question was whether you have any data or information about the street ambassadors, where they're located, how many there are, what hours of the day they operate. We were
sure.
we were just
I
kind
can
of
get
saying
that.
that no one on the committee has ever personally encountered a street ambassador.
Sure. I mean, I can get that information and send it to the community board.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. Joel, were there other specific answers or responses you were waiting from DOT on that you maybe wanted to highlight for Colleen right now?
I don't know that we got to the point where we asked them specific questions other than the things that were in all our resolutions for the past few years. But John, did you ever get far enough with anybody to ask?
Yeah, well, I mean, Colleen, hey, I was emailing like back and forth with you guys about some specific questions that we had, just kind of, I mean, there's like a rather long list of some of the stuff that we were looking for, questions regarding bike lanes in general, and also separately usage and safety data about specific bike lane corridors that we asked about. Just kind of.
Sure. And Jonathan, I did get your email. I know we've been corresponding about that, and my colleagues are finalizing the questions, so you should be getting them shortly, maybe within the week or so.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, didn't forget that.
Great. Thanks, Colleen. Sarah, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I live in Union Square, and when I cross 17th Street to go to the Barnes and Noble bookstore, that bike lane, it is an accident waiting to happen. And I really don't know what you could do about it, because the bikes come roaring up from Park Avenue South, going north, and then they go west. It just seems very dangerous to me, and I'm very creeped out about crossing it. But I don't know what to recommend, because I don't know if really there are any accidents. And secondly, yesterday it was my fault. I was watching the sunset at Christopher Street and the Hudson River, and I was walking across the bike lane, and I just didn't see a very fast moving bicycle. And luckily the cyclist said, "Watch out." So I quickly sprinted across, but that was my fault. But it is hazardous, and I have to, as a walker, I want to keep watching. I don't know what we can do more than we've done. My comments. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Nancy, did you have another comment?
I do. I have a question, two comments actually. One is the area that Sarah is talking about, the north side of Union Square. City Bike is not don't have enough free docking stations, so that there's a lot of congestion, particularly on Saturdays when there is the green market going on. And so all of that traffic goes out into the bike lane, and that creates even more traffic, more congestion in that area. City Bike has to figure out a way to move the bikes around so there are destination docking stations available. This is continuing to be a problem. So that's one thing I want to bring up. The second thing is, in response to Sarah, the places where you are to cross the Hudson River Park, they're crosswalks. And bikers are required to stop for pedestrians in crosswalks. The pedestrians have the right of way. I know it doesn't mean anything, but when I'm there, I get out in the middle, I hold my hand, I'm gonna say, this is a crosswalk, you have to stop. It's really annoying that bikers just zoom through a crosswalk. That's a traffic violation. So I'm sorry I'm complaining, but Sarah should not have to watch. They're supposed to be watching for the pedestrians.
Or there could be, if I may just comment briefly, there could be places where the bikes have to stop and other places where the pedestrians have to be careful. Half and half.
That's what a crosswalk is for. It's very clearly marked, and it even has signs.
I was at a crosswalk.
Sorry. Okay.
We're at a crosswalk, and there is a sign that says slow down or stop.
We just want to avoid a crosstalk or a bilateral conversation. But thank you for the comments. I think those are good examples of of exactly what we're trying to address and the kind of deficiencies that we see in current enforcement. Obviously, they should be bicyclists should be following those laws. To the point of continuing to try and come up with practical action that we can take to affect some kind of change. I'll pose the question again: are there any strategic suggestions or ideas that anyone might want to offer as this task force kind of continues this engagement? Obviously, it sounds like we're going to be getting some data from DOT pretty soon. That will be great. The task force will continue to try to engage the electeds as they have been, but just wanted to check one more time whether there are questions or comments from other members of the committee in terms of other things that the task force should maybe try out at the same time.
EJ.
Oh yes, sorry, Joel. Go ahead.
That's okay. In addition to ideas, if anyone has not ideas just for things to do, tasks and methods, but agencies or groups or people to talk to who might be helpful beyond those that we've already mentioned speaking to, because that might be another way to go about this if people think of anything.
Yeah, great point. Any other thoughts or ideas from members of the committee? Luke?
I'm not really a member of the committee, but if anybody needs help with gathering data, I gather data for PSQL committee, noise complaint data. So if anybody needs help with that, shoot me a message.
Thanks, Luke. Appreciate it. Well, not hearing any other kind of specific ideas right now. If you do have any, please feel free to share them with myself and Sam, the 4 members of the task force. We would like to hear them if you have any more of those ideas. As Joel said, strategies, questions, people to reach out to, or even more agencies that we could be reaching out to for data or information. Joel, was there anything else that you wanted to add or anything else that you wanted to ask?
No, I think I've been through all my notes. I didn't circulate again all the resolutions and with all the things that we've asked before, but I think with what John's already asked DOT, that's in the works. And if there are gaps there, we can always go back.
Great.
So I think I'm good.
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you to Joel and to all the members of the task force for that update. That's really informative, and we wanted everybody else in the committee to be aware of what you've learned so far and what you're continuing to work on. As I said, if you have any ideas, please feel free to email them and reach out. If you have any questions or you want to see any of those resolutions that Joel was talking about, shoot us an email. We can share those as well. It sounds like we'll be getting some information from DOT sometime soon. So obviously the task force will continue to do this kind of research and eventually move us towards a conversation that we can perhaps have in a future meeting and perhaps a proposed position that we can maybe eventually adopt and vote on with some kind of unified voice. Obviously, as we heard tonight, we know that there were plenty of hotspots with issues and that there are plenty of people who are not following the law, and we're trying to be proactive here in terms of coming up with something that we can at least adopt or recommend in terms of changing that state of affairs. Because we will continue to identify those problem spots for DOT and NYPD, but at this point, I think there are ideas out there for ways that we can rethink our enforcement, and maybe we can throw our weight behind some of them. So once again, thanks, Joel, and to all the members of the task force. Again, I think this is something that'll come back to us perhaps eventually in a future meeting. But anyway, with that, unless there are further questions or comments, I think that wraps up our agenda for the evening. Thanks very much to the members of the committee and to our attendees, our 3 attendees. With that, this concludes the meeting. Everyone, please have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.